Today, we are talking leadership. This means for you guys leading teams, building stuff.
This is like, again, the basics, right? But something we've learned in trying to work with agency owners.
I never woke up one day and said, you know what I want to do? I want to be a leader and I want to lead teams and I want to be this role model and looked up to. It was more just like it started with one person.
It happens in husband and wife. It happens in my family, just like he's very much like the leader.
Every level of the leader is to figure out what's really important here and how do we allocate our time for what we're really trying to accomplish.
As an agency, we want to get to that level of growth where we need a COO, but it really starts with like maybe your assistant, your operations director, your manager.
What is up, motherfuckers? Today we are talking leadership. This means for you guys leading teams, building stuff. And I know no better person to bring on than Karen Hite, besides just being a really cool chick and has some like really interesting life goals and the way they live their life. And I'm just, fans of her and her husband, JC, and their family that they've built. We are going to be talking about a few of the things Karen is working on. She runs their committed mastermind, Hite Digital, which she's a co-founder. Been on Inc. 5000 like a billion times. You guys are like rapidly growing, rapidly scaling, doing all kinds of cool stuff. And you guys are organizing cool adventures all around the world, Mexico, Costa Rica, and doing cool stuff. And we so appreciate you coming on here today. We're going to be talking leadership and managing the dreaded people.
The one problem that one of the many problems that I guess we have, or joys, depending on how you see it.
Yeah. So you said something off air that I thought was really, really interesting is that, so you're helping people like building teams and ultimately like, doing the fulfillment side of the business, which is probably the part that is not talked about enough. And you mentioned like you're seeing a lot of issues related to communication, delegation, and prioritization, what I would call the all important basics. I wonder if we could do just a little deep dive starting with some of the things that you're seeing showing up for folks and like, just some of the thoughts you see on solutions and tools and things like that.
Absolutely. So since TCS, actually before TCS, we have been like working with the integrator, something that we have learned, and this is like, again, the basics, right? But something we've learned in trying to work with agency owners, this visionaries, is that it's all great in the meetings that we have, right? Like we talk about strategy and dreams and all this cool stuff. And we have a great time in the conversation. We come up with like, okay, this is what we're going to do in the quarter. And then we check a month later. It's like, did you get it done? And no.
Well, this happened and that happened and blah, blah, blah. And
exactly. All of the things start like and sometimes, I mean, these are very valid excuses, right? That's why things are not happening. It's very valid in your brain. But what we realize through that is that, you know what, my goal personally is to make an impact, right? Like whether it's in a conversation about motherhood or in a conversation about business, whatever it is. And I cannot make an impact if things are not getting done. And so for me, that just started creating this frustration. So we just, you know what, like, let's talk to the doers. Let's provide them the tools that they need. And so we're still super focused on the CEOs and we have so many resources for them, but we just add to that, like the component of like actually being able to work with their team, which I enjoy so much because things actually get done. And if we set a dream, then it's actually being executed, which creates that movement in the needle, right, for the business. So through that, it's just conversations on, creating SOPs and managing. And one of the things that I was telling you, like, I really think that before we can talk about systems or anything like that in operations, I can come as much as in here as many times as you want me to. But one of the things that I really have seen is like the basics are still something that we need to be reminded of. And those three things that, it's kind of like a no-brainer, right? Like we have all heard it, like you need to communicate well, you need to be able to delegate well, you need to be able to prioritize, yet we still see that. And more importantly, our teammates are still learning that, right? Like maybe we are at a level as leaders where, yeah, sure, like I'm going to masterminds, I'm talking to my peers, I know what I gotta do. But we have this whole like scale with stability framework, that JC has created at Hite, and I apply that into anything that we do. And one of the main components of that framework is people. And so if your people are not leveling up, right? If you have read any of the books from John Maxwell of like the law of the lid and all of that, if your team is not also leveled up and like growing and working in the same wavelength that you are, you're really like your agency is really not going to grow. And so that's one of the things that I was just, you know what, like this might be good. It's just a good reminder. And if there's somebody that has a team that needs to be reminded of this, or that's developing that integrator, that leader, that second in command, I think this would be just good information to share.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love what you guys are building on that too, because, you know, like I find like a lot of times the best agencies have that sort of, in fact, you and JC have that kind of model where there's one person who clearly is like the restaurant front of house, and there's another person who's the back of house, and usually like the other person understands what the other person is doing and could step in if needed, but they both don't like doing the other's role. It's like they like that. And so when you help develop that second in command, a lot of times it's such a blessing for you as a leader, because then you have somebody who actually understands what you're trying to do and can execute, like for me as a visionary type, all my crazy harebrained kind of ideas. But I wonder if you could talk about this, because I'm assuming it's probably true for a lot of your people. I never woke up one day and said, you know what I want to do? I want to be a leader, and I want to lead teams, and I want to be this role model and looked up to. It was more just like it started with one person where I was just trying to get some work off my plate and who could help me, you know, do that. And then you make your first hire. And then eventually, okay, we got more workload and it's two. And like over time, this grows, and you suddenly find yourself in a managerial position. And I remember one of my mentors explained it to me when I asked him, what was it like for you? He described my situation so simple. He said, well, when you first get into it, you're almost reactive again, like when you first started the business, and you're not proactive, because like people like literally just come to you all day long and go, hey, do you got a minute, boss? You got a minute, boss? And it's like every manner of thing of like, hey, I need to get access to this account. Can you send me a verification code? To, hey, what do we want to do about the payroll? And this client wants a phone call, and this, you know, like, and it's just every manner of thing gets controlled at you. And in the beginning, you usually have no structure to it. You're just like
Yeah.
open sort of borders where people come to you. There's no office hours. There's no processes for anything. And so you just like literally feel like you get a mountain of shit thrown at you every day. And then of course, in the middle of that, balls get dropped and, you know, needs get unmet. And not that you're not trying to fulfill on promises, but it's a new thing to try and fulfill on promises through, you know, a team of 50 people than when it was when it's just you, right? Like it's a totally different game, because now it's about getting it done through others' actions. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, you know, like you guys probably went through, you know, some kind of similar journey where you didn't wake up one day and said, I want to be the leader. I want to be the top of the, you know, it just kind of like, it's a role that often gets thrust upon you out of necessity. And you're usually pretty ill-equipped, not even like to deal with it, but to even recognize you're in that. Like for me, I didn't even recognize I was a manager trying to figure out managerial kind of leadership kind of things.
There is like so much that goes into that. And I think, you know, I feel like JC did wake up or was born being a leader. Like he's just like a natural, you know, like there's people that do like are born that way, right? Like they are born with the instinct of wanting to lead and wanting, and that's amazing. I think one of the things that I've been looking into is like the, you know, personality traits and the 6 types of working geniuses by Patrick Lencioni. There's this book on that. And there's like people that just have that naturally. I didn't have that naturally, and something that I had to develop personally. I'm very much, when you're talking about that visionary integrator, you know, those visionaries are normally those that are like, okay, I'm ready to go and let's talk about it. And like, and then you have to develop that other aspect of the business, which is like, okay, now I need to protect my time, because if I want to continue dreaming and doing the vision, then I need to protect that time. So I can do that. And that's where I think like that dynamic that we talked a little bit in Cancun, right? And that session of like the CEO and COO, that's normally what we see the most happening, right? But it happens in husband and wife. It happens in my family, you know, just like he's very much like the leader. And he's like the big ideas, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess like we can do that. And like I go through all the details. When I stepped into more of like a leadership role within the companies that we own, I went through that struggle of like, I never saw myself leading people. I never saw myself speaking from a stage, much less, you know, handling a whole event, talking to others about it. And for me, you know, that journey was, there's so much like in terms of mindset that goes into that, right? It's just like the imposter syndrome from the first point, you know, just like thinking, can I do that? I remember having a conversation with one of my friends. I'm like, am I Beyonce or am I one of the backdrop dancers? You know, like who am I? Am I about to be Beyonce? Like, can I be Beyonce? And just, you know, just like talking through that and just like laughing at that. But It really
But you're
is.
right though, can I just say that the imposter syndrome is real? And I think like, new levels mean new devils, where it's like, there's still versions of imposter syndrome that you have at like higher levels as well.
Yeah, and even let's say that you take the chance to be a leader, right? And so like you push your, whether it's for out of necessity or you were just like, okay, now I have to deal with this. For me, something that was very interesting in that journey was when you normally in the beginning you normally learn from another person of what it is to lead. It's very similar to like speaking, right? You find the speakers that you're like, oh, I really enjoyed that session. Let me, if I'm gonna do a speaking, let me like try to take something from each one of these and try to convey who I am as a speaker. Very similar in leadership. And for me, having people that I look up to, and even like literally like the person I have in my own house, like leading, I started to like see like their traits, and in the beginning I remember like trying to imitate that, and there's a point where that's healthy and there's a point where that's not healthy. And so I think like when you're going into this whole journey of like who you are as a boss, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, there's a lot of that that it's happening. And for me, one of the things that I experienced was thinking that success or that true leadership was to be exactly like that person. I actually struggled that personally.
Yeah,
Because
I'll tell you, like for me, can I just say, like,
Yeah,
I would see people be like successful speakers in my industry, the top dogs, and they were kind of like Tony Robbins. They were all hype, and they're like, oh man, like I ain't Tony Robbins. I ain't gonna be like, put your hands up and everybody, let's go walk on coal. Like I'm just kind of like goofy, and I got memes, and I'm like, then you think, oh, I have to be like, Tony Robbins, and I'm not, and then immediately there's a conflict in that.
And then you think that you cannot lead because you're not at that frequency of whatever it is, energy, like that level of experience and whatnot. So that's something that I struggle with. And if you're watching this and you're in that boat of like comparing to comparison, I think it's good. It's good to like have people to look up to. It's good to like have those challenges where you're working on yourself to like improve what you're doing. But I think there's a point where you have to decide. And there's like gifts that you have as an individual. For example, like I feel like one of my gifts is to be a very empathetic type of leader. I want to talk about the things that are hard, and the things that my team's going through. And I'm not somebody that's gonna like, I'm just gonna pump you up, to like get things done. Like I'm not, like let's do it. I am not actually, when I see people saying like let's go, I'm like laughing. If you ever see me saying like let's go, I'm like being very sarcastic because I'm not that type of person. But I
just want to say you can lead without being a bro marketer. Just so
exactly, you can totally lead, and there's probably it's more difficult for me, or maybe I realize that more because I am not one of the bros, in this industry, which is somewhat very male dominated. But it's just like having to find myself in those rooms. It's mainly guys. I mean, like my mastermind's like mainly guys. I mean, like even
and alpha males too, not just like random guys. Big personalities and things like that.
Yeah, big personalities. And so I don't know. I think it's a journey, but what I found was that by understanding who I was and what I felt comfortable with, the more I lean into that instead of like what I saw other people doing, like the better leader I was, right? Because I was like naturally using my gifts and putting them into practice. I don't know if that's what you have.
Yeah, I was actually thinking just kind of like what you said earlier, and I was trying to think about that, like in terms of what you're saying now, in terms of like what does that look like for a process? And you mentioned obviously like where you see a lot of the balls get dropped in communication, delegation, and prioritization. I always felt like for me as a leader, and you may have a different approach, but I always felt like step number one in a lot of cases is really prioritization, which is like figuring out like there's a massive amount of incoming shit, but what in all of this is even important? Like what actually moves the needle? What helps our clients the most? Because what happens, I think for me, is like when you kind of default into this quote unquote leader role, is what happens is in the beginning, you treat all of the incoming as if it's equal, as if all of the, every like fire to put out is equally important. And then what happens is you find out there's more fires to put out than you have time. And ultimately, like the big important things, the balls get dropped and don't get done. And I find even before you delegate it, even before you communicate of it, like sometimes the hardest part is just making sense of like what actually needs to be done here. Like what, and sometimes too, I'll say, like our stuff is tricky because like entrepreneurship doesn't always come with a roadmap and a playbook. It's not like a job where you know what you're going to come in and do. like a lot of times you're figuring it out and you're making it up as you go along. Like you're not handed, here's the playbook, step 1, step 2, step 3. A lot of times like there's confusing periods of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even know what's important anymore. I got somehow lost in the weeds and all that. So I wonder if you could share just a little bit of your experience of like what prioritization looks like for you and how you make sense of like, I mean, you guys like at Hite Digital and Committed Mastermind, like you're serving literally probably more than 1,000 clients collectively. So like, you're not just doing this for 1 or 2 people, right? Like, and then the teams and employees, like that's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of, stuff going on. And so I imagine like, even just making sense of the priorities is probably in many ways half the battle right there.
Yeah, I mean, like all the agencies in our group and everything that we do, I mean, we're all working on this, right? And I mean, you felt this, or you're probably like one of your teammates. I don't know if you have had this scenario of somebody coming to you and saying like, "Hey, like I feel overwhelmed." Have you ever, like had a teammate like, just had that conversation?
It never happens to us either, right?
Right? Never happens to us. The first time I remember that it happened to me, like I was just like, I feel so overwhelmed. And I was not even like, I wasn't a parent. I wasn't even like, having, like I was working. So like this happens at any level. And like now it's kind of like when you do 75 hard, and you're like, oh, I don't have any time. And then you do 75 hard or whatever. I did like 16 days of 75 hard. Yeah. But like in those 16 days I was I was on point. Yeah. And I'm like, there's so many hours during the day if you actually like do the things and you organize. So when I have teammates, that are coming and say like, I'm super overwhelmed, like I don't have time for anything. Like one of the first things that I do is like, let's look at your calendar. If you're like if you're not scheduling your time, obviously you're gonna like, it's just nature. Like how much time
you literally interruptions all day long. Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's like, you're gonna spend time in there. If you're not organizing your time, then like you're gonna find yourself doing activities that, and we all, by the way, have like an amazing tool. If you are paying for your Gmail account, you have Google Calendar, you're using Google Calendar, you can actually see where you're spending your time. Yeah. There's this like feature inside of like, which I don't know if like people don't know about this, but every time that I show them, like, oh, like that's cool. But like you have this feature inside of your calendar that tells you where you're spending your time. You can categorize your activities, and I'm very much of like, I want to see like my calendar like color coded so where I know where I'm spending my time. I'm just that type of person. So like
organized needs
it's a rainbow. Yeah. And it's a rainbow. I know it's a rainbow, but it helps me to see, like if I'm having a crappy sales week, let's say, right? Like we all go through that, like, oh man, like I didn't achieve what I wanted to achieve. I go and like, surely I didn't spend as many hours in the sales activities that I needed to spend or meeting with people as I should have, right? Like it's not like magical, like sales appear, like it's a numbers type of thing. And same thing happens for any processes, right? If you want to achieve, exactly, you work sort of like backwards. And so like using calendar, I think it's the number one thing, but also like you mentioned something about.
Can I just add real quick before you start? I had a mentor who said to me that like if you kind of built it like I did, where you're almost a leader by accident, he said the biggest threat to your time is all the incoming, and the first thing you should do is schedule office hours and give people times where it's okay to interrupt you and times where it's not. And then what will happen, instead of like it be 100 hours of open office hours, contact me all day, every day, it went to these are the times it's appropriate for us to talk about that. And that alone will give you time to then be able to schedule other things. And I always found that a really useful thing, because like I was just dying by the, hey, do you got a minute? You got a minute? You got a minute? You got a minute?
Can we talk about it? Yeah.
And then you jump on a call real quick. You got a minute? You got a minute? Do you have a minute?
And people are pinning you, like as the leader, like they're messaging you. Another thing, I'll like do the reverse of that too. It's like teaching your teammates how to do this, how to like use their time. Also, it's such a privilege, because how many times as visionaries you're like, hey, let's do this idea. I know like the visionaries I know, they come up with like 10 ideas in like a minute or whatever, and they're constantly wanting to like share that with the team, right? And so like having that conversation and allowing your team, by giving them these tools of like how to organize their time and how to like, hey, if you have things in your calendar, it's not about saying no to things. It's about saying like, what do I need to move? Or like, what is like, let's talk about prioritization, right? What should move up in the scale of like the priorities that we have for this week? So, or what should move down, that, we can have a conversation. I feel like a lot of integrators have that problem of, I don't want to say no to like my boss, if I say no, like, it's like, I'm going to get, and there's like this like weird toxic relationship between managing time and accomplishing things. And
Yeah.
if you give that to your team, then yeah, like not only they're going to be able to focus on the things that you want them to focus, but it's like they're growing as leaders and they're able to teach that to their people that they handle. And so anyway,
Can I just
just
say, fun little conversation on that. One of
yeah.
my mentors, his integrator was named Sherry, and I remember Sherry was kind of sassy, but she would look at him and say, "Hey Ken, you got 27 harebrained ideas that you want to do, and we have the capacity to execute 4 of them right now. So pick 4, and we'll do those 4, and then when we're finished that, we can talk about the other 26." And like you said, like a lot of those people don't think they can say no to their boss, but like, she's also got to manage bandwidth. If she says yes to all 27 and then ends up dropping the ball in the vast majority of them, he's going to look at her, like you're not doing your job. As where when hey, this is the realistic capacity, figure out what's important. Let's build the important stuff first, and then we can get started on the next thing after that. If fourth is, every level of the leaders to figure out what's really important here and how do we allocate our time for what we're really trying to accomplish. It sounds so small, but like I said, it's so easy with the amount of incoming fires, as you mentioned, like just my phone, I probably have received 27 messages since you and I started talking, the amount of notifications and pop-ups and incoming and things you got to stay on top of. I wonder if we could talk just here. I want to be respectful of your time, but last couple minutes, let's talk about the CEO or the COO, I should say, goodness that you've built, and how folks can potentially benefit from that, where they can learn more.
Yeah, I mean, what we did is just like we hone it into what we are seeing that makes the most results, right? Like makes the difference in agencies, and that is supporting.
We actually, before you even do that, because you use a term that I think you and I are super familiar with, but not everybody is an integrator. What is an integrator for somebody who's like?
Let's talk about it. So when you have a vision, and when I'm saying vision, like you have an idea, right? You want something to be accomplished. Like there is somebody that enjoys the details and the execution of those ideas, right? Like normally the person that comes up with the idea is not the person that's like, oh, like what is it? What are the things that could go wrong with that idea? That's normally like in my case, JC is the dreamer. I am like, JC, how could this fail? Right. And so like that's normally the person that you're in constant communication to. People call them, we say COO because like obviously as an agency, we want to get to that level of growth where we need a COO, but it really starts with like maybe your assistant, your operations director, your manager, anybody that is actually executing.
If you're really small, it's like your first hire is often your integrator.
Your first hire. Yeah. It can be so many things. And so depending on where you're at and the level that you're at, it could be applicable to like your assistant, like the person that you hire first, like the person that is in product, the people that are actually doing the work, right? Like doing the execution of that. That's normally what we call an integrator. And there's a really good book, by the way, E-Myth by Michael Gerber. It's amazing to understand the different levels. So if you're a leader, I think that would be just an amazing book for you.
If you guys want to grow, that's a must-read book, which Karen just mentioned. E-Myth by Michael Gerber. Well, I think I'll mention that in the write-up just for folks who didn't catch the name. Yeah. But let's talk about what you guys built and how folks can take advantage or at least learn more about it.
Yeah. I mean, first off, go to coo.committedmastermind.com. What we've done is just allowed this opportunity that we have. Like, I mean, you come to like Frankie's group to learn and connect and like get responses and, get all this strategic, and like, that's where you network. And like, I mean, this is amazing, right? Like if you're here and you're listening to this, like, this is literally what has been allowing you to like grow and Frankie's kind enough to like give us all an opportunity to do that. Well, your integrator, literally the person that is in command, also needs that because they need to develop themselves. They need to like grow as an individual. They need to talk to people that also understand that they're not crazy and that's normally not their boss, right? Like that they can make sense out of this and like, no, like this is not insane. This is like, or everybody is insane, right? And so what we've done is just create this opportunity of having an environment that it's only for integrators. There's no CEOs allowed unless you're really the person that is executing, right? And we're going through weekly trainings, very similar to, I think you have done this quite a bit of like having like office hours or Q&A. We go through a training of 20 minutes and then we open up for Q&A and we solve things together there. And so like people that have had the experience, because we have different levels there of agencies that are a million, agencies a million plus, agencies that are getting close to that. Guess what? All those integrators are also learning how to like, oh, wait, we served 30 clients first, but now we're serving 50 and then 60. And the systems need to be innovated and they don't know as well, right? Like all the things that we're facing, they are facing too. And so we just created that opportunity for them. So you can find more about this at coo.committedmastermind.com. We can have a chat about it to see if this is the right fit for your team. But I'm really excited because I think like that's that's where I went through that, role of like having to learn all the things. And it's really cool to like bring all this knowledge, even from outsider people to this group. So yeah, we're really excited.
Just so you guys know, I asked Karen specifically to come on this because obviously, like, I'm a marketing kind of visionary guy. But one of the things that happens for people like us is we're usually bad at follow through. Like, if we don't have an integrator and we don't have somebody on the details, like our ideas don't get done to the finish line. Or we'll do it once and then drop the ball the second, third, fourth time it needs to be done and things like that. And what she's talking about is like really like speeding up your team to get to world-class operations. And so when you have world-class operations, I'll tell you as a leader, it makes you so much more comfortable actually selling and promoting your thing because you can actually fulfill on the promises that you're delivering. And the flip side of that is if you lack those systems and teams and all that, then you'll know like deep down that every time you sell something, like a client's going to be pissed off and hate you in like 3 to 6 months. And that doesn't feel super good. And so it becomes really, really hard to grow it. But when like you have a team of people that are going to make you look good and have your back and really serve clients, like the conflict, a lot of that is removed. So, it's not always obvious, but this is for a lot of people, like the bottleneck in sales is actually they know deep down they don't have world-class fulfillment.
I love it. I'm going to use this for the copy for the ads, actually.
Awesome. Anyways, we'll put some links for that. You guys check that out. We appreciate you coming on here, Karen, and doing this. And you guys train your leaders.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hey guys, if you like this video, you may also like my best-selling book here, Beyond the Agency Box. It is all about scaling a digital marketing agency while eliminating meetings and phone calls. We actually sell our stuff phoneless. We don't have any client meetings, and we also hire our team entirely without meeting phone calls, which allows us to, like actually kind of live a life. I've laid out the entire blueprint and everything you need to know, getting clients, onboarding, setting expectations, scaling, building a team, you name it. It has been a bestseller on Amazon now for over 5 straight years, but now you can get it even cheaper than you can get it on Amazon. So I can't tell you the exact price because it may change when this video is released, but there should be a link to it below, either in the description of the video or as well as a pinned comment. So if you're interested in that, check out that video and you can get a copy for super cheap.